Greetings. I wanted to open this video with the exchange you see on your screen to offer it as a sort of disclaimer for this video. A short while ago, Ahlazar ben Lawya, the leader of the Sicarii group, left a polite comment on one of my videos about his group, in which he alluded to the fact that he intended to produce a response to my videos when time permitted. And at the time, I responded to him saying that I look forward to his responses and that he should take all the time he needs. And, you know, I alluded to the fact that I myself don't ever try to rush anyone or put any sorts of time limits on anyone, because I myself can take a very long time to respond to a whole variety of things that I'd like to address, and so I wanted to share that just as a sort of disclaimer to say that this video, which is my third video about Sicarii, is not in any sense intended as a way of trying to rush him or his group or anything like that, but I just wanted to offer some clarification on some things after coming across certain things. Okay. What I wanted to discuss in this very short video is the following. Now, full disclosure, I don't know what thread this came from. Someone posted this screenshot on Facebook from another thread, and I was unable to find the thread that it came from. Nonetheless, I found the comments therein interesting. Apparently, while I don't know the fuller context, it's apparently a part of a discussion about a re-upload of one of my videos. And I wanted to focus in particular on this comment at the bottom of the screenshot. This comment here struck me as simultaneously fair in part and yet unfair in part. The reason I say that is because it's fair in the sense that he was alluding to the fact that the re-upload of my video declared my video to deliver an utter refutation of his group or of himself. And at the very least, the section on the Matres Lectionis was attempting to start a conversation on the subject, and therefore objectively it wasn't a definitive refutation. It was an attempt to move a dialogue on the subject further. And yet this relates to the reason that I consider the comment somewhat unfair, insofar that I don't think it's proper to say that I quote-unquote copped out on the subject. Rather, I was attempting to invite further discussion on the subject because I think there does need to be clarification on what Matres Lectionis means to proponents of Lawya Kodash, how that fits within a paradigm that assumes Lawya Kodash. My video titled Reply to Sicarii had a few minutes devoted to the subject of Matres Lectionis, in which I elaborated on this point, and then I had a second video, a follow-up video titled Brief Note on a Matres Lectionis in Yehoshua, where I elaborated on one of the points that I was attempting to make in the previous video. And now, again, I don't know what thread the screenshot came from, so I don't know when the comment was made. It may have been made before the second video. Nonetheless, I would argue that I made a meaningful contribution to elucidating the complexity of the issue of Matres Lectionis vis-a-vis Lawya Kodash, and I would invite Ahlazar to watch those videos or rewatch them if he's already watched them, as I'd seriously like to hear his thoughts on what I brought up therein. Now, I've been attempting to dialogue with proponents of Lawya Kodash for well over a decade, which is actually something Ahlazar himself indirectly alluded to in that screenshot. And it's been my experience that proponents of Lawya Kodash bringing up Matres Lectionis is a very recent phenomenon that's only popped up in the last few years, maybe 3 or 4 years. Nonetheless, while I'm not including Ahlazar in this, it has been my experience that those few proponents of Lawya Kodash who do bring up the Matres Lectionis are more often than not confused as to what it refers to. For example, I'm showing a tweet on the screen. Now, full disclosure, to my knowledge, the person who wrote this tweet is not a member of Ahlazar's group. At least I don't think he is, or I don't have any evidence that he is. I don't know what he's a member of, but he is a proponent of Lawya Kodash, and he's also someone who seemed to conflate the Matres Lectionis with the later Nikudot, the dots and dashes produced by the Masoretes. The reason why I showed these particular tweets is because they're the most recent examples of that confusion that I've encountered, but I've encountered it elsewhere before. Interestingly, on a video from last May on the Sicarii Public Enemies account titled Camp Basher Approaches Sicarii, a deacon in Ahlazar's own group gives the strong impression that he himself was uncertain on the distinction between Matres Lectionis and the much later Nikodot that were developed by the Masoretes. Here, listen to this.
So have you studied the Hebrew? Have you did any research on the Hebrew?
A little bit.
Okay, so when you look at the Tetragrammaton or the characters that make up the Tetragrammaton, it's very simple, brother. There was no vowel points. That didn't come to the Matres Lectionis, or whatever the hell it's called, that the Masoretes put into play and put vowel points on the characters. So before that, it was just Yahweh.
Now, again, I'm not including Ahlazar in that because in his review of Vocab Malone's interaction with GMS Dallas, he clearly stated that the Matres Lectionis come from well before the time of the Masoretes. Nonetheless, we see that a deacon in his group apparently was under the impression that the Matres Lectionis were the vowel points introduced by the Masoretes. And I don't show that as part of some attempt to ridicule or satirize anyone. Rather, I show it to demonstrate that there is a real need to clarify how people understand the subject. There are proponents of Lashon Kodash who will refer to the Matres Lectionis without quite understanding what they refer to. And it seems that some of those folks may even be within Ahlazar's own group. And so I think that in itself shows that there was real value in what I had said in my previous videos, in my attempts to start a discussion on how proponents of Lashon Kodash understand the Matres Lectionis. So I'd like to close this brief video by noting that there are a few questions that I would have for proponents of Lashon Kodash who appeal to or mention the concept of Matres Lectionis. First among them is the question, how do proponents of Lashon Kodash understand the concept of Matres Lectionis? And I don't mean that in any sort of patronizing way. What I mean is that, for example, the concept of Matres Lectionis entails that centuries before the time of the Masoretes, even a millennium or more before the Masoretes introduced the vowel points, the Nikodot, speakers and writers of Hebrew were already employing O and U and long E vocalizations in their writing of the Hebrew language. Do proponents of Lashon Kodash acknowledge that O and U and E vocalizations were part of the Hebrew language, were part of written Hebrew centuries before the time of the Masoretes, more than a millennium, perhaps, before the time of the Masoretes? A second related question, which came up in my previous videos on the subject, is how do proponents of Lashon Kodash determine when a Mater Lectionis is present? Now, that's a fairly easy question to answer outside of the paradigm of belief in Lashon Kodash, but within the Lashon Kodash paradigm, it's an interesting question. Now, to be clear, I'm not referring to cases, for example, where a wa is being used as a conjunction or is being used to set up the third person plural on a perfect tense verb or anything like that. But in other cases, like in an active participle in the singular, or even in a word like lashawan. Think about that. The first word in the phrase Lashon Kodash, that word lashawan, is the wa in lashawan a Mater Lectionis? And how do you answer such a question? How do you determine whether it is or isn't? Via what standard? I'm not joking. I'm actually sincerely interested in how proponents of Lashon Kodash would answer such a question. And finally, the third question I would ask is, do proponents of Lashon Kodash see a Mater Lectionis as introducing a new vocalization, or merely as introducing a symbol representing an already existing vocalization? This is a nuanced question, but it's an important question. In my past videos, including videos responding to Sicarii, where I discuss the vocalizations in the Masoretic text and vocab's appeal to the cry on the cross in the New Testament, I noted that it's clear, the evidence is clear that the Masoretes did not just introduce new vocalizations. Rather, the Nikudot symbolized vocalizations that had clearly existed for centuries, that had existed long before the time of the Masoretes. And the reason why it's important to point that out here is because we sort of get a rule of thumb that we can work with. Just because symbols representing vocalizations are introduced, that doesn't mean that those vocalizations came into existence at the same time as the symbols representing them. So just as the vocalizations implied by the dots and dashes in the Masoretic text could predate those symbols by centuries, so too the introduction of Matres Lectionis, the introduction of Matres Lectionis, assuming there is a beginning point for them within specifically the Hebrew language. Believe it or not, there's people that actually dispute that, even though we can easily point to other Canaanite dialects that don't use them. But nonetheless, the point that I'm trying to make is that the introduction of Matres Lectionis into a writing system would not necessarily entail the introduction of the vocalizations that they represent. Those vocalizations could have existed long before the Matres Lectionis were introduced to represent them. And I'd like to see proponents of Lawya Kodash who want to discuss the Matres Lectionis sort of, address that point and grapple with it a bit. On that note, I look forward to the comments of others. I just wanted to throw this really quick video together while commuting home on a train. And so, as always, God bless.